Welcome to the Fleet Geeks Podcast. We're here to help develop fleet and transport professionals. Do you want to progress and develop your skills and knowledge? We promise to bring lively conversation and debate around interesting issues and keep you bang up to date with changes in our awesome industry. The Fleet Geeks are a community of professionals, and if you enjoy the podcast, why not join the discussion for free in the Fleet Geek community over on Facebook?
So this session is going to be, does a transport manager need to have been a driver to be a good transport manager? I think there's going to be lots and lots of opinions amongst the listenership. However, I think that it's going to be a very, very interesting one for us to talk about. So kick me off, one of you two. Does a transport manager need to have been a driver?
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? It's an age-old debate that we have, isn't it? It's does a transport manager need to be a driver need to have been a driver to be a good transport manager? I think a transport manager needs to be a good transport manager, regardless of their background. Jamie,
no, definitely. It's never going to hurt, is it?
No.
Being a driver first, but it doesn't. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all, in my opinion. I've met transport managers that have not been drivers, and there is capable as people that have been drivers, but any experience is a good experience, really, if you've got that experience.
Yeah, it's a too broad a brush to bring to it, I think, isn't it? It's, you can say you can get a good driver, it's a great driver makes a terrible transport manager, and vice versa. Get a driver who doesn't really get into the driving, decides to go into the office and lo and behold makes a great transport man. It doesn't necessarily follow through, does it, Pete?
I've got lots of opinions on this. I think that it's interesting we discuss it, and the reason we're discussing it is we've got a Facebook ad out for the business for the webinar that we're going to be running around what a transport manager's worth, and there's been it's literally blown up with comments from drivers, largely I believe drivers, saying transport managers are inexperienced, blah blah, need to have been a driver, need to have experienced it. So my point of view on it, there's several, and I think I'm going to struggle to get them all in, really. But the first one is the driving role is really varied depending on the industry and depending on the type of the business. Okay, so at what point does a transport manager need to have driven for long enough to be classed as experienced, and can he then only be a transport manager in the sector in which he's driven?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So I'm just going to pose that, and that's a rhetorical question more than anything. But essentially, there's many operators out there that run multiple types of operations, and essentially, if that transport manager, if we're going to use this rationale, we need to say, right, the transport manager needs to have done all of the driving in that business
in a very narrow field. Yeah,
essentially.
Absolutely.
And then I think the other thing is around, if a transport manager is good, I think the criteria for a good transport manager doesn't actually relate to his ability to drive. And so the next thing that I was thinking about is from an HR point of view, and actually how discriminatory that is. So essentially you're saying that a transport manager couldn't ever be disabled, because actually a disabled person might really struggle to be a driver because they struggle to access the cab, yeah? So does that mean that disabled people can't be transport managers? Another big meaningful question that's potentially rhetorical.
Absolutely. You're narrowing the field so much if you start putting those caveats on, and as you quite rightly say there, Pete, it's, if a driver has spent 10 years driving on a night trunking for a supermarket, for example, good experience, 10 years, does that mean that they have the experience then to become a manager in, let's say, the waste sector, which is a completely different,
absolutely, and
literally a kettle of dead fish.
I've seen this time and again as well, and even when transport managers have changed from different industries. So I work quite closely, I've got to be careful what I say here, but I've worked quite closely with a business that have brought in a transport manager from a container background into a waste and recycling business, and actually has tried to implement a lot of the same things that have worked previously in the different other business, regardless of whether he's driven or not. We're sort of moving way beyond that, and I think I think that drivers will often see this as a very simplistic type solution, one size fits all, square peg, square roll, round peg, round hole. And the challenge is that you've got this transport manager who's got loads and loads of experience in one sector, tries to replicate that in another, and actually that doesn't work. So what that then tells us, what we're then leading into, is actually transport managers don't need to be a driver. In my opinion, they need to have what's called empathy and understanding and be able to listen to the people who know and are experts in the business. That's my opinion. And then be able to form policy, procedure, strategy based on the learning that they gain from the people around them that are at the sharp end. What say you to that?
I agree, and also not overlooking the fact that a transport manager's role is very varied. There's lots of skill sets in a transport manager's role. IT, the way the industry's gone electronically, everything's electronic and it's on an app, it's on a system, planning systems, etc. So there's a lot more skill set to just the driving side of it. The transport manager, it might even be the finance side of it. It might be someone that's really good with their figures and facts.
Yeah. I mean, Mike, the trainer's going to say, I'm going to sort of naturally come from what the job description of a transport manager is according to the legislation, but it goes way beyond that. And I often say to people, you have to be, as a transport manager, you have to be all things to all people. You have to be HR manager, IT manager. You have to be, marriage guidance counsellor. Referee in a sort of dispute between two drivers. So it goes way beyond that sort of legislation. So are we saying as a driver that you gain experience of the rules and regulations, and therefore that's the only way you can go into transport management, or is it experience with the job itself? And I think, as Pete says, the empathy, isn't it? It's what we need.
I think you can even use other analogies when we start to talk about this. And like I say, I think I mustn't sound like I've not got sympathy for drivers who get very frustrated with shit transport managers who don't understand what they do. I'm not saying that they're still good transport managers, for example, so I get that frustration from drivers, I totally understand. But we have to use the rational thinking around this. So a great example is Manchester United Football Club. I'm going to use them as an example. Alex Ferguson's one of my heroes, right? Probably a pretty mediocre footballer.
Yeah, I don't think I think he got an injury very early in his career, didn't he? So I don't think he played at the
He
top
became
level.
a manager very early as well, very early. I think he was only early 30s when he first started managing in Scotland. But no one, regardless of what team you follow, what team you support or anything like that, can actually argue the statistics of Ferguson's career as a manager. Absolutely amazing manager. Well, what made him a great manager? Because it wasn't his technical ability as a footballer. And what made him a great manager was he understood people, he understood his players, he knew who needed a slap round the face, he knew who needed an arm around the shoulder, and he knew exactly how to get the best out of the people around him. And I think that's transferable.
Absolutely. While we're on football, we can chuck in Arsene Wenger into that. We could chuck into Clive Woodward, the greatest rugby manager. Not a steady played rugby, but not in a stellar career. And a great man manager. So I think you say there, Pete, is a shit transport manager is probably just a shit manager. To be fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
that leads on to another issue, doesn't it? Is that other side of training, managing people is a big difference. Perfect. It's okay knowing all the rules and regulations, but actually managing people is a whole other ball game.
And there's loads of them out there as well, and you see them all over Facebook. They'll literally quote verbatim from the undertakings, and it's I'd hate to fucking work for someone like that, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Because there's the legislation, and we've got to take that seriously. We've got to follow the rules. But on the other hand, it's the way in which they're implemented. It's the human approach that's taken within a business to be able to deal with people. And I go back to saying, whilst we're using the football analogy just quickly, Wayne Rooney seems to be having a very good coaching career and was an amazing footballer. So we're not saying that great drivers won't become great transport managers. That's absolutely the case too. But I think we need to widen our focus around what constitutes a good transport manager. And there's so much. There's the technical element. There's the passing the exam. There's understanding the things that can go wrong. But then there's that human element, which I think leads quite well probably into our next podcast as well, doesn't it? Around. Yeah. The challenge that we think is that there's not much development out there for drivers beyond the exam.
Hi, it's Pete from Flagship Partners. We're really proud to sponsor the Fleet Geeks Podcast.
Flagship Partners offer a range of consultancy and training services to ensure that our customers remain compliant and have the best possible knowledge to be able to fulfill their work. If you're interested in support with any of our safety, HR or compliance services, or you want to train to be a transport manager or need driver CPC training, give us a call today.
The skill to be a good people person is it's people, isn't it? With the industry we're in is all about people. That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? So to be the technical knowledge, I think, is a prerequisite. You need to have that technical knowledge. And as you said, Pete, I think it's applying that technical knowledge in a practical sense rather than just quoting all the rules and regulations, and that's coming from a trainer. So for me to say that's quite a brave thing, I think, isn't it? But I think for me, it's definitely just good people management, being a people person.
Yeah, what do you reckon, Jay?
Well, I think you need a bit of an engineering mindset as well. Dealing with a couple of £100,000 worth of kit, perhaps it's.
It's empathy.
You're dealing with
empathy towards the human condition, empathy towards the mechanical condition. Yeah. But then I would say drivers need a decent empathy with the vehicle. So we could get a whole new debate there. Does a driver need to be a mechanic before they be a driver? So we would end up going round in circles, wouldn't we, if we had these prerequisites for?
Yeah, but I think if you've got a maintenance supplier, for you to keep on top of them, I think you need a bit of to go back to them and say these things aren't right or these things need doing in this time, whatever. I think it helps to have that little bit of background, understanding more than the knowledge.
So I think it's interesting because I live by the old adage: it takes a village to make a king, doesn't it? It takes a village to raise good quality. So I think that potentially the transport manager doesn't need to have those experiences. I think if they've got the great people skills, they understand the law, etc. But they've got the quality of people around them to be able to help them deliver.
That's not always the case. That's the issue, isn't it?
And that isn't the case. And I think so. Therefore, I think it depends on the business. So in a larger business, potentially you could have a transport manager who's very, very successful, but essentially he's got a leadership team around him that's supporting him from a technical point of view regarding mechanics, because I think that's very valid, that having a mechanical understanding, being able to challenge repair centres, being able to challenge workshops, I think is really, really important. And then having someone who really understands the drivers, their situation, because you need to be able to have some challenge there too. But potentially, in a small business, if you're going into a small business as a transport manager, sort of freshly minted from your training with Mike, there's going to be a big potential knowledge gap there, which potentially is where the Fleet Geeks community comes in, doesn't it? Where sort of round back to that community of people where you can go, well, I'm not too sure about that.
Absolutely.
Can I have some help?
You don't have that support. I think we've said it in a previous podcast that it's a very lonely place, isn't it, to be a transport manager, because generally speaking, within a business, unless you're working for a haulier where there's that is inbred into sort of most of those people, where you're working in a business where transport is ancillary to the business. You might be a manufacturer of tables and chairs or something, but the transport department nobody really understands the transport department, and you're out there on a limb, aren't you? And so it's a very isolated place to be for a transport manager. So you need that support network in place. Absolutely, I think. Is essential. But I'm just going to put a cat amongst the pigeons, as it were. So the original sort of motivation for this podcast was that post that Pete mentioned there with drivers complaining about transport managers lacking the experience as a driver. What do you think, Jay? What do you think the drivers' main complaint is? What is it that they don't think that transport managers don't get?
Well, I've been a driver and I've been a transport manager, and as a driver, I think you don't see the bigger picture, and I think that's quite frustrating. A driver's generally away from the office, away from the transport manager, so they don't actually see what the transport manager does. And I think some of their frustrations, the drivers are the ones on the road that if there's hold-ups or if there's something gone wrong, they pay the price time-wise.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think their frustrations naturally go to their line manager, I would say. So that's one of the issues, and they don't really know what the transport manager's been doing in the background because they're not there. It's not like an office where we all sit together and Dave's doing this today, whatever.
It's visible, isn't it? You can see what's going on, but that's true. And I think we become isolated a little bit. It's the nature of the job, but as a driver, they may just see their world through their lens and their day. They're having a shitty day, and it's all the transport manager's fault. But what they don't see behind the scenes is that transport managers having a shitty day times 50, because there's 50 drivers out there all having challenges. So I think sometimes, without sort of attracting the wrath of drivers listening to this, you might think that I'm not being empathetic, but it's from a transport manager's point of view. Your world is all of the drivers, not just just the one driver with the one problem on that particular day.
I'd also say as well, I was driving when we went from phones all the time to technology came in, it's messages, and I sometimes think it's easier to send a message from the office to the driver. But once again, that empathy is gone then, isn't it?
Oh, that's an interesting one, Pete.
And I think the drivers just see the message, and it's not the explanation they used to get from the phone.
Yeah, communication skills, Pete. So I know you're big on this, and we've got to be careful, because we're not going to be encouraging drivers to receiving and making lots of phone calls, because we need to move away from that. But I think Jamie's right, Pete. In text messages, the written word can often come across in a way that we don't intend it to come across.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got sort of 2 points to wade in on here. One is around the silo elements. Don't let me forget about that, but I'll directly address the question you just asked me around the communication. Albert Meribian, a sociolinguist who studied human communication, was quite clear that actually only 7% of what we communicate in writing or verbally is received by the other person, based on the words that have been selected, and the rest of it comes from tone of voice, it comes from body language, and it comes from all of that. So essentially, a text message or an email, you're losing 93% of your total message, of your total ability to communicate something, and I think that's particularly lost. So I think that's definitely a podcast for another day, about communication skills. Flagship offer a driver CPC course around interpersonal skills, which I think is highly valuable, and we get great feedback from drivers around it. But actually, it may well be worth transport managers attending something similar, or office staff, planners, that kind of thing. I think it'd be great to get in and do.
I know you're going to come back to silo in a minute, but just on that point, while we remember, I delivered a course not so long ago which was very similar to that, and the drivers loved it. Great feedback. And they all said, do managers come on this course? And it's a bloody good question, isn't it? But so absolutely. Back to your silos.
Absolutely. Yeah, so from a silo point of view, I feel very, very fortunate that I've worked in a range of different businesses in different industries as well. And it's a tale as old as time, absolute tale as old as time. So you have, when I back in the day when I was a teenager and I did part-time work, I used to work in a kitchen in a restaurant. And you used to have the chefs, and you had the servers, the waiters, waitresses, that kind of thing. And you used to get conflict between the two of them because their interests were slightly different. The waiters and the waitresses had this challenge around the people-facing element of what they were doing, and the challenges they were put under. And then the chefs had the challenges they were put under by, things being poorly managed, too many customers arriving all at once, not allowing time to prep the food, poor quality food order, or lack of communication from the staff. And then I moved into working in workshops, and then that's twice as bad. You've got workshop people against the office people,
parts department.
And then you've got the parts department, and you've got the service department, and everyone thinks the other's shit because they didn't do this and they didn't do that. But ultimately, you're only ever seeing it through your frame of vision, your little window on the world, and it's very hard to have the empathy to see through other people's. And I think the challenges are much the same from a driving and transport management point of view. And that's why I think ultimately root cause analysis, why drivers feel that transport managers need to have been out on the road, is because drivers feel like they're not understood. And actually, when we start to look at psychology and all of that sort of stuff, all we ever want is to feel understood. It gives us that warm feeling when someone understands what we're saying. I think that ultimately drivers are just going, I need to be understood, because you don't understand the things I'm going through, the challenges I'm facing, the hold-ups I've got, the people that are treating me like a twat when I go somewhere, those kinds of things, people talking down to you, all of those challenges that are faced. we can challenge those things, can't we, if we've got understanding?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. It's the empathy. It's the understanding what you, and you're quite right there. You know, driver's lot is not a happy one, generally speaking, is it? It's you're knocked from pillar to post. As you say, you're treated like shit everywhere you go. You're not even allowed to use toilet. You know, that kind of thing really must be difficult to live with on a day-to-day basis. I know it would be a struggle for me to accept that kind of behaviour. So drivers do go through the mill, and I think a good manager just needs to understand that. And that's the thing. And I think there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. It's the old saying, you know where you find sympathy, it's in a dictionary between shit and syphilis. So that's where you find sympathy, isn't it? So, but empathy is a completely different tool. Empathy is just understanding what they're going through, giving them someone to listen to, isn't it? And to just be present with them and say, look, I get it, I get what you're doing, but you know, I get what the problem is. But there's a whole load of other stuff going on that we need to sort out.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, spot on. I think we're done there. So thanks for listening. We could go on about this all day long, and we'll talk about communications.
It's a great subject.
Yeah,
It'll be interesting to see the comments.
Yeah, definitely. We're interested in your feedback. So if you want to get involved or you've got any questions, do get in touch. Drop some comments in, and you can maybe shape the next podcast for us too. All right. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please share with your friends and colleagues too. Join us for free on Facebook with the Fleet Geeks community for transport and fleet managers. Fleet Geeks offers ongoing professional development, networking and mentoring too. So get in touch with me, Pete Rushmer, on any social media platform to find out more.